I'm Detective Carter. Do you speak any English? Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hollywood Gold. I'm your host, Daniela Taplin-Lundberg. I'm here with my right-hand woman, Becca Camerata. Hey, Bex. Unfortunately, we're not together.
I'm very sad about this. We had this really beautiful run of being in the same space for a few months, and now we're separated again.
Now we're looking at each other over Zoom. So today we're going to launch into one of the great franchises that came out of the 90s era of buddy films. We're going to explore Rush Hour.
I'm very excited because my first introduction to the Rush Hour franchise was, I'll never forget it. It was my sister's 15th birthday or something, and we went to see Rush Hour 2. And the fact that this group of, teenage girls all wanted to go see Rush Hour 2, like that was the one that everyone picked to go see for her birthday. It's such a testament to how wide of an appeal this franchise has.
Yes.
So I'm very curious to hear about the origin of it.
Well, I think it had the benefit of introducing Jackie Chan into the American market, and he was truly a genius and like a phenomenon in China. And also Chris Tucker, who is truly one of the great comic geniuses. And Rush Hour was really the thing that launched him into superstardom. But if you had been a child of the 90s, you had seen him sort of in more supporting roles in movies like Friday and The Fifth Element. And he was just, whatever he did, he sort of stole the show. And so I'm so fascinated to find out why Jon Glickman, the lead producer, decided to take a chance on him because he was not very well known at the time.
Well, I'm very excited to hear about the whole story.
Let's get going. Jonathan Glickman, like esteemed producer, head of a studio, new best friend of mine. I'm so thrilled and excited to be talking about Rush Hour.
I'm only one of those three. I'm the best friend of yours, but I used to be the head of a studio, and I'm going back to being an esteemed producer.
Yes, you are. I'm so excited about things we're cooking up. So today I want you to take us into the birth of a franchise, and we're going to talk about Rush Hour, which just spawned movies. And I feel like there was just words yesterday of a fourth one being cooked up. I don't know whether you can deny or confirm.
I don't know too much about that, but I know, yes, there's always been talk about keeping it going somehow or another.
So let's start from the beginning, because I really think the combination of Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker was kind of genius and inspired and not obvious. And I just want to know from your perspective how this all came to be. So just start from the beginning.
The beginning starts with the beginning of my arrival to Los Angeles. I was living in New York. And I left a job answering the complaint line at the HBO, which was like horrendous, like taxing mental abuse.
Okay.
And I got in to distract myself. I applied to the USC Peter Stark program, and I got in. I didn't know anybody in LA except for one person whose name is Brian Burke. And at the time, he had just graduated USC himself, film school, and he had this collection of friends that to this day are very important filmmakers. And later, Brian became J.J. Abrams' partner. But at that point, they were all just hanging out with each other.
Sure.
And not doing much. And Brian said, we're all going to go to see this movie. It was either in Glendale or Arcadia. It was far away from L.A.
Okay.
Called Super Cop with Jackie Chan. It was called Police Story at the time.
Okay.
And I didn't know who Jackie really was. I was a huge film fan. And I was a film fan of all different genres. And I still am.
Okay.
But Jackie had escaped me, and I went, and my mind was blown. And this is literally probably a week before I started film school.
Okay. So what year was this?
This was 1992, August or September. And it was probably a week before I started actually taking classes at USC. Okay. And I was just looking for something to do and connect with somebody. So I went, and my mind was blown. It was like Charlie Chaplin meets Raiders of the Lost Ark, meets every great action, meets Bullet or any great action movie that I had loved.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen anything like it before. And I never forgot it. It really blew my mind.
Okay.
And so I became a monstrous fan and waited until, I went to USC for a year. And I ended up getting an internship working for Joe Roth and Roger Birnbaum.
Okay.
And I had pitched a trillion ideas and I was just saying anything to get myself hired or noticed in the room. And I ended up pitching an idea for a movie that didn't become a big franchise, but they ended up moving forward with, which was The Jerky Boys.
Oh my God, that's incredible. Like you were just going for it.
And on some level, I was just talking to say something to get noticed. I don't even know if I thought any of these ideas I was pitching were particularly great ideas.
Yeah.
But they ended up making that movie, The Jerky Boys, and I was 24 years old, and they sent me to New York to produce it, and I was staying there at the Mayflower Hotel, not knowing at all what I was doing. I'd made a student film at USC, and that was about it. Ironically, with the guys who I just made the Wednesday Addams TV show with. And so these relationships last a long time.
Oh my God. Who were those guys?
Al Goff and Miles Miller. Miles was my editor on my movie.
Okay.
And the star of the movie was an actor named PJ Clapp, who 5 years later became famous as Johnny Knoxville.
Oh my God.
One of those things where if you look back, we were also like kids, kids. So anyway, so I made that movie, and then that movie was number 1 Friday night and number 11 Saturday. No movie had a drop like that ever. And by luck, I had made another movie around the same time, because at that point in time, it was I wouldn't say it was easy, but much easier to get movies made then than it is now.
Right.
And I bought a script that turned into While You Were Sleeping. So that sort of gave me a reprieve.
Yes. Sandra Bullock star. Amazing. Yeah.
Exactly. And so my career sort of went from zero to hero and then back to zero and back and forth. But the whole time I wanted to do a movie with Jackie Chan, and I was obsessed with finding a vehicle for Jackie Chan. Our deal at the time, I worked for Roger Birnbaum and Joe Roth, and our deal at that time was at Disney.
Okay.
And got close with an executive there named Mike Stenson, who also liked Jackie. So we would look for screenplays all the time to see if there was a vehicle we could tailor for him.
Okay.
And a script came in, and it was actually submitted by a guy named Arthur Sarkisian, who executive produced While You Were Sleeping. And a script came into us called Rush Hour that is unrecognizable to the movie Rush Hour.
Okay.
It was about a hostage situation in Los Angeles that took place at Rush Hour.
Okay.
Which is the title. The only thing that lasted was the title. And actually, it was an American cop versus a Chinese cop. And Jackie's character was actually the bad guy.
Oh.
But at that time, people were a little bit more loose with their development money, and there was a lot more movies being made. So we took the kernel of that idea and bought that spec, which, during that point in time, a lot of people were writing full screenplays speculatively to sell. And so we bought it. And we said, okay, we're going to turn this into a movie that can be for Jackie Chan. And we both knew that Jackie had to be the hero of the movie. I mean, you couldn't make a movie with him being a villain.
And had you been communicating with Jackie, or was this just an idea in your head?
It was just an idea at first.
Okay.
And then we hired a guy named Jim Kauf, who was a big writer at Disney. And the beginning stages of this process was all about how do we get Disney to say yes to this movie. So we made some decisions kind of filtered through that lens. At that point in time, when you have a deal at a studio, you need to get them to say yes, ultimately. So you have to do things that please them. And so we hired Jim Kauf, who was very popular. He had written a movie called Stakeout that was a big hit at Disney.
Oh, yeah. Emilio Estevez and Richard Dreyfuss. I love that movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Disney loved him. And so he basically took this movie and turned it into a straight ahead buddy movie between an American cop and a Hong Kong cop who comes to America to help him find a kidnapped daughter of a diplomat. So that actually was created by Jim. And also what was created by Jim were certain set pieces that stayed all the way through. Jackie listening to the Beach Boys in the American cop's car. That was in that script.
Yeah.
And scene where the American cop teaches Jackie how to sing and dance to the song War by Edwin Starr.
Right. Okay.
I think that's pretty much the most that came out of that script. I don't know if much more from it, but at least it gave a foundation of a straight ahead buddy movie, which at that time felt like, this is in the heels of Lethal Weapon and those other films. It felt like it was the best way to get a vehicle for Jackie, to partner him with a star that was more established in America. And so that was our thinking, at least at the time.
Okay.
And so we got the script in, and then Roger Birnbaum and I flew up to San Francisco to meet Jackie. And we had dinner with Jackie at a hotel. He was there for some reason.
Okay.
And that was our introduction to Jackie.
I had read somewhere that Jackie didn't speak very good English.
Well, that comes into he speaks English a lot better than either of us speak,
Yes, Chinese, exactly.
But, it wasn't something that he could fluently read a script and say, okay, here we go. But, he was so charismatic. And I think the movie Rumble in the Bronx was about to come out, which was a film he made through a Chinese company, but was set in America and was hopefully going to be this, movie that transferred him into American stardom. And it did okay. Not amazingly well, but it brought a certain amount of new fans to his story rather than just cinephiles who were just or huge Jackson fans. So we met with him and he agreed to hang in there with us and us to try to make this movie. But we needed a co-star for him. And at that time, there were a couple of other projects that, we weren't the only people thinking this about Jackie. So a couple of projects out there that had come to him, but he agreed to cement his relationship with us. So we went back and we started going through stars that Disney would want to make the movie with. So we are exclusively in that lens.
Right. Who is that at that time?
So the first one was Bruce Willis.
Okay, yep.
Bruce Willis passed.
Yep.
And then I think there may have been a couple of others. I can't remember for sure right now, but very soon thereafter, we got to Martin Lawrence because Martin Lawrence was in a movie called Nothing to Lose that was a buddy movie and Disney was very high on it at the time.
Okay.
And the movie did okay, but not at the moment. It felt like that movie was going to explode. And we met with Martin and then we had a great meeting with Martin Lawrence and Jackie Chan. And we were like, okay, this is a movie that's going to be undeniable to Disney at the time.
Yeah.
And ironically, around the same time, Joe Roth, who was one of my two bosses, went to Disney to become chairman of the film studio. He was Roger Birnbaum's partner at Fox. They had a really close relationship. We were doing all these things to make Disney love this project. And we were like, okay, we got Jackie Chan, but we also have Martin Lawrence and we got Jim Kauf. We didn't have a director yet. And we went to Joe and Joe passed. And he passed like several times. And Mike Stenson, I know inside the studio was fighting really hard, but we couldn't get Joe over the hump.
Oh my God.
Not being able to speak is not the same as not speaking. You seem as if you like to talk. I like to let people talk who like to talk. It makes it easier to find out how full of shit they are.
What the hell did you just say?
Two officers were shot. One man lost a pinky.
But did nobody die?
You destroyed half a city block.
That block was already messed up.
And you lost a lot of evidence.
We still got a little bit left.
Had Joe been supportive when he was partnered with you on it? Was he like, yeah?
I think it was so deep in development when he was there that he wasn't really that engaged. And so he came around the time Jim's script was delivered and we were trying to cast it.
Okay.
And so we were left with, okay, we have Jackie, we have Martin, who's beloved at, has great TV shows before Bad Boys had come out.
Right.
And so we have to figure out what our moves are. First, we have to find a director. And so we met a bunch of directors and we had heard about this movie Money Talks that New Line had made with Brett Ratner that was going to be great. And so we met with Brett and Brett was really excited about the story and loved the idea of doing a movie with Jackie Chan. So we attached him. Now we hadn't seen Money Talks. New Line wouldn't let us see Money Talks. Okay. And I remember we were like really kind of like, okay, let's fingers crossed this works out. But so we have this package now. We have what I would say, to be blunt, is a very solid, but not like a special buddy cop story. And so we went around to all the studios. Without fail, every one of them passed.
Okay.
Every one of them. And we went begging for all of them. We went to Universal.
Yep.
They had a project that they kind of liked a little bit more that was a buddy movie with a Chinese cop. We went to Fox. We went to, I remember Sony. I remember the people that passed. Some of them are good friends of mine to this day. And everyone said no, except New Line, because New Line had made Money Talks and they really liked Brett.
Okay.
But there was a condition with New Line, which was New Line wanted to cast the star of Money Talks instead of Martin Lawrence.
Okay.
Which was interesting. The star of Money Talks, or the co-star of Money Talks, was Chris Tucker. And normally that would have been like, what are you talking about? Who is this person? You know, Friday had been made and sort of worked a little bit theatrically, but really exploded in home video.
Right.
But Roger and I knew something because both Roger and I had worked on Dead Presidents, the Hughes Brothers movie. And Chris Tucker is in that movie. And when you saw that movie screen, people lost their minds over Chris Tucker in the audiences.
Right.
So we knew he was great. And we actually had tried to develop a movie with Chris right after that.
Oh my God.
We had a relationship with Chris.
Yes. Okay.
So we have one place that wants to do it, which is New Line with Chris Tucker. And then we have this obligation to Martin to try to get this movie made with him. And nobody would do it. So there was no one left to do the film with. And so we went with New Line, which was ultimately, obviously, was the right move. And Martin went on to do incredible things on his own. And who knows what the movie would have been that way. But that is how that movie ultimately got set up. So now the movie was set up. We had a director and we had our key cast and we had the script that was okay, but not spectacular. And so we worked with the executives at New Line there. There was an executive named Jay Stern who was specifically on the project, and Mike DeLuca, who was the head of the studio, to, find how we're going to make this thing better than it is. And we hired a couple of writers that didn't really necessarily take it to the next level. And I'm telling you, we are probably 10 weeks or 12 weeks away from shooting.
So they've greenlit it, but they want you to sharpen it up.
Yeah, and we knew we needed to sharpen it up. And mind you, I'd made maybe 4 movies in a span of 2 years, and I was a kid at this point. I mean, this is probably 26.
Oh my God.
The director was probably 26, and Chris was probably 24, 25.
You were kids. You were all kids.
And then you have Jackie, who obviously is a big factor, but Jackie wasn't very involved in the actual script creation. Chris had a lot of good ideas in the script creation. And so we ended up about 3 weeks away from shooting. We needed a polish and we kept working. And my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, her brother was an assistant for an agent named Sue Nagel, who had this client that he thought was a great client named Jeff Nathanson, who had written a pilot that he thought was great. And so I read it and it was really funny.
Okay.
So I'd given him the script. I don't think he had done any movie rewrites before. And Jeff came in, and I remember we met across the street from where I'm standing right now on Sunset Boulevard. And he did something he changed the movie significantly. It doesn't seem like it was a major change, but it really was, I think, the reason why the movie worked, storytelling-wise. Which was before there's a kidnapping, and then an American cop has to work with a Chinese cop, and how do they get along, and does this work, and all that stuff. Jeff's idea was, there's a kid who's been kidnapped. There is a Hong Kong officer who works with the father of the child who's been kidnapped, who's coming to go find where this kid is.
Okay.
And they don't want this guy meddling in their business, the LAPD. So instead, they assign a cop to take care of this guy, the Chinese guy, and keep him as far away from the case as humanly possible. So what that did is it created a story now where these two cops, one is, Chris Tucker's character, Carter, who really had ambition and didn't want to work with a partner and really thought he was the king. And he's the kind of guy who wants to solve this case. And instead his job is to babysit this visiting cop and keep him as far away from the case as humanly possible.
Yes.
And even though that doesn't seem like it was a huge change, it was a massive change into the story because it gave them both a story for them to sort of play out throughout the entire movie, especially the American cop. And it made them underdogs from minute one rather than just being a typical buddies who are investigating a case.
I love it.
They were the losers that everybody would try to keep away, not to mention the fact that they didn't get along, the two of them themselves. And so that's basically how that happened. I want to say one thing that I forgot to mention because we talked about Jackie's language. When Jackie first met Chris, it was at the William Morris Agency. And Jackie and him were talking, and Chris says, I don't understand a word this guy's saying. So that became a big part of the movie with the whole scene where Chris says, do you understand the words that are coming out of your mouth? All of that came from that first meeting to get a sense of their exact chemistry and how to translate that crazy chemistry of these two guys and how to put that inside of a movie.
I mean, that stuff was so genius and is still iconic. That's like a meme, like Chris Tucker saying that.
Yeah.
So good. Okay, keep going.
So basically, Jeff had done that work, and that really made the movie sparkle, and it was really funny. I mean, I remember a lot of lines that came from the next 2 weeks that made its way all the way through the movie. I can't underestimate how critical that was. And it taught me a lesson that's a dangerous lesson for producers to know. I'm reading a book about the making of The Way We Were right now, and it's all the same story in a lot of these studio movies. It's everybody wants a great script, and it's nothing's more important than having a great script. But you can't diminish what happens on the actual script writing from the weeks that lead right into the movie. Like the 2 to 3 weeks can transform a movie, especially if it's a movie that's developed around actors' personalities.
Yes. You can't artificially create that. Like it has to have the actual people engaged and focused and there and seeing their chemistry. You're so right. It's like you can say you want to develop a perfect script, but you really can't until you see all the players in the room.
And just on the movies I've worked on, even the last movie I've worked on, there have been these crazy moments that the screenwriter never could have thought of because they weren't part of that process at the time.
Right.
That are the most, significant moments in the movie, because then they just happen because of the right alchemy between the actors.
Okay, so that feels so authentic. Like that dynamic and that chemistry just felt like the two of them had to be in the room together. Okay, so you're getting the script. It's like tightening, it's getting there. The prep is going well. Like, talk about that a little bit.
I think the prep actually went pretty well, if I can remember it. I mean, nothing crazy. We were shooting in Los Angeles and we were headed into El Nino, which all of your audience members probably don't know, but it's a unseasonably extremely rainy season. So we knew it was going to rain all the time. If you look at the streets in rush hour, they're always a wet down. There's always reflected lights, which actually makes it look very nice.
Yes.
But that was the main thing we had to work around. And we shot for, I'm going to try to get my timing right on this. I think we either shot for a couple of days. We had a little bit of issues at the beginning, which I'll get into, but we shot for a few days. And then the director, Brett, got chickenpox. So I'm telling you, we were very young. I mean, young enough to get chickenpox. And so we had to shut down for a couple of weeks. And
a couple weeks.
I think that helped Jeff get even more of the script together and helped us considerably with the quality of those scenes. And things were pretty normal. We had one snafu at the last second where we had a wardrobe test. We had Sharon Jones was our costume designer who's, does Black Panther, who's one of the best of all time. But there was a little bit of a dispute between not Sharon and Chris, but everybody just like, what kind of clothes would Carter wear? And so much so that, and I don't mind saying this now because everybody's friends, but Chris didn't show up to the first day of shooting because he didn't like what he was going to wear.
No, stop.
So the first day of shooting was sort of this day where we had to cobble together a day with Jackie. And I remember the head of the studio showed up with Werner Herzog. Bob Shea was the head of New Line at call. And we were like, this is what we're going to do today. But, we worked through it. And the next day we were all locked and loaded on what the wardrobe was going to be. And that was the first day of shooting with Chris and Jackie, and it was just magic instantly. I mean, Chris is amazing. Both of them are amazing on the floor. It's kind of hard to explain. Chris takes the scene. He knows what the lines are.
Yeah.
But he certainly knows what the intent of the lines are, but he finds these magical human moments that are so funny throughout the entire scene and just elevates it. And by the same token, Jackie took a lot of I can't even underestimate in any way whatsoever what Jackie did to that movie. Every action scene was choreographed by him.
Oh my God. He choreographed his own stuff?
100%. A lot of it on the fly, very quickly. And, it wasn't the type of movie, when he makes a movie in Hong Kong, at the time when he was making movies in Hong Kong, they can shoot for 100 days on a movie and really figure out a stunt in incredibly deep detail. You can't do that in America. So I think he was a little frustrated by some of the restrictions that he was put on.
Right.
And the American sensibility. I remember one day, our DP was a guy named Adam Greenberg who had worked with Jim Cameron, a major DP. And he didn't like something Jackie was doing in a stunt because the light wasn't working or the continuity wasn't right. And Jackie turned to him and he said, if people are worried about the continuity or the lighting, then the scene isn't working because they're going to be focused on me, not the lighting or anything else.
Right.
So there was a mismatch of styles, I think, a little bit.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the movie had situations like that pretty much every day where we had to get out of the rain or whatever, lots of things that made us have to improvise. But you had two actors at the center of it who like live on improvisation. So we were able to not just turn lemons into lemonade, but turn, lemons into champagne.
It's
I mean,
magical.
The magic of that movie really was kind of created on the day quite a bit.
And Jackie appeared to me to be such a pro. Like he'd been doing this for a long time, but Chris was sort of new. He hadn't been in any star vehicles. I mean, maybe
Money Talks he had just done.
Money Talks, right. It just felt like you were capturing them all at the right moment.
Yeah, Jackie's the most professional actor I probably ever worked with and such a hard worker. And at the end of the film, there's a big money drop where thousands of dollars fall to the ground.
Yeah.
And Jackie would be the first person when you said cut to start getting on the ground and picking up.
Oh my God. I love that.
And for Chris really is the sweetest, nicest guy. I remember one time my grandparents visited. My grandparents lived in Wichita, Kansas, and they came to visit the set. And my grandma was sitting in Chris Tucker's director's chair. And I said, Grandma, why don't you move? You should. And Chris, not as a show in front of my grandma, took me aside and said, you can't tell your grandma to move ever. And really was pissed at me not pissed at me, giving me a lesson about how to be respectful to my.
Oh my God. I love that. I love that about him.
It was just there was a real alchemy on the set. And, it was something that we knew we were having a good time making. I don't think any of us thought that we were making a movie that was going to cut through the way it did.
Yeah.
But we certainly knew that we were giving it all every day.
Yeah. Observing different directors is always so fascinating because they all have different styles and different bags of tricks and different things that make them magical. And what was his thing?
Brett is a childlike, I should say, in his sensibility. Mm-hmm. And so he is a lot of fun with this genre and specifically, and really was making sure that people will reel, but also that people would laugh and find magical movie moments. He's a huge fan of film. So he knows a lot about the history of film and cinema. And there's some I think there's a pretentious reference to The Killing of Chinese Bookie by John Cassavetes in the middle of the movie. You have that type of thing. But you also have just his, sense of humor. And it wasn't just that he didn't miss a joke. I mean, usually a director might miss a joke and it's I wish that paid off better or whatever. He didn't just not miss a joke, but he would find jokes all the time on his own. There's a moment, it's weird again, because I was kind of the grown-up on the set. And meanwhile, maybe because
You're
I'm
a
6
kid
months
yourself.
older
Yeah.
than the other people involved. But there's a moment where before the daughter gets kidnapped, she's in the car, and I went to set and I show up on, as we're about to shoot it, and he's shooting her singing to a Mariah Carey song.
Yes.
And I'm like, Brett, we don't have the rights to the song, and I don't know how much it's going to cost, and has a huge sample in it or whatever. And I remember it was an issue between us that day. And of course, he was able to call Mariah Carey because he has these connections. He got the rights to the song, and it's a great moment in the movie. And that wouldn't happen except for his sensibility. So his sensibility and his sense of humor is certainly throughout the movie.
And it's interesting. We don't really get into the darker parts of personas in this podcast, but, it felt like he was also early in his career, so probably very eager and youthful and just all in, and you had the best of him probably.
There was definitely a family atmosphere on the set. His girlfriend, Rebecca Gayhart, was there all the time.
Yeah.
My wife was there all the time. One of the best moments I had was bringing Brian Burke to the set, who kind of started this whole thing.
Yeah.
And hanging out in Jackie's trailer. And, Jackie's scene is, and I'm saying this, I'm sure most of your audience have seen the Elvis movie, but a little bit like the Elvis entourage. Certainly they didn't enable bad behavior, but he has an entourage. And there were a bunch of people, and there was a manager there, Willie Chan, who was very, flamboyant and an incredible character on his own.
Yeah.
And, these other people, his stunt team. And so it really was a fun set to be on. There's a lot of nights in LA. but it was never like a grind, and you never were like, it never felt very hard to figure out what was making the movie work when you were working on it, because those two guys at the center of it always were just bringing their A game at all times.
Just received a threat on the building. We ask you please exit the building as soon as possible, and please do not panic. Do you hear what I just said? Get your shit and go out the door. Hurry up, get your hell out of here. Some more.
Jon, I mean, this was early in your career, you hadn't shot an action film of this level yet. What was that like?
I think I shot like a stunt where like a kid fell off a bike and while we were sleeping. It was like that. The most that I had done. That was great. I mean, listen, it spoiled me because I learned from Jackie Chan, and it was incredible to watch him do what he did with his team. And I ended up making 4 other movies with Jackie. He will get you out of any problem.
Right.
Any problem.
He's your crutch. Like anytime you have an issue, it's just like he can create magic.
I wish I had that on a lot of other movies. I ended up making a lot of other action films. But the truth is that he was such a smart filmmaker about where the eye was going to be on screen. Mm-hmm. And I still think action stars should watch this, especially when you watch some of these big, huge action films. He always got hurt and was human in his action scenes. And so when you see him get like punched in the face and you see him look like he's human inside of these superhuman experiences and not like, somebody who's just either, doing what the stuntman told him, something that happened in previs, or just so impervious of pain.
Well, that's so brilliant because, I mean, he obviously did all of his own stunts. And so it just like, he probably did get hurt and like, he was just living the actual experience. That's such a genius observation. He wasn't like protected.
No.
It's like him and Tom Cruise, like
yes,
do all their own shit.
Yeah.
And so the shoot was so fun. You guys probably didn't even realize how successful it was going to be, but like,
no, not at all. I remember calling one of my best friends, Eric Newman, and saying in the middle of the movie, I think this movie might be going straight to video. I don't know who's going to see it, because you have to remember the whole anchor of this movie was to get Jackie and a superstar, to introduce Jackie to the world. And instead we have Jackie and an actor who we really liked, but hadn't been in a big hit movie.
Right.
So it was, both of them were unknowns. I don't know how this movie would get made in today's world.
Right.
Because it would be like, what are the numbers? And
sure.
I don't think any of us had a clue that the movie would cut through. We just knew that we liked what we were shooting.
Was the studio watching dailies getting excited, or were they like, we'll see?
I think the studio they were supportive. I don't know if there was any sort of paying attention to the footage as we were going. There was a couple of great moments. The scene where we shot War, Chris Tucker teaching Jackie about the song War, was like something that I remember getting cut immediately and showing it to everybody, just because that's the movie right there.
Yeah.
There were a couple days that we had to reshoot stuff because you couldn't understand what Jackie was saying. So there were certain times we'd have to check in, but generally the movie sort of was not something that the studio was just completely hovering over.
Right.
I think a lot of that was New Line style of movie making. There were a lot of movies like that at the time. I think if we had made it at Warner Brothers at the time, for example, we would have had a lot more eyes on top of us.
So talk to me about that era of New Line kind of starting to come into the forefront, but they still sort of felt like underdogs to me. They weren't like one of the major studios. What was their philosophy?
I mean, they were the last stop for us to go to. I mean, quite everywhere else. But I think that it's interesting. I went to Michigan, and when I was an undergraduate, Bob Shea spoke. He presented Nightmare on Elm Street. And then Bob Shea, who created New Line Cinema, spoke about his path from being a Michigan student to going into the movie business. And it's one of those foremost experiences that made me think, oh, wait, I can do this. And so making it for him, first of all, it sort of felt like a full circle event, but also I understood that underdog fighting sensibility because he made it clear from when he presented that movie that was his attitude. And so I think that what they were doing is they were making a lot of movies that were commercial, that weren't as fancy and as expensive as the other studios. And so there was a little bit more risk taking because they didn't have to do the big numbers that the other studios wanted to.
Right.
So it was a good time to be making that movie at that studio, for sure.
What was the budget of the movie? Do you remember?
I think it was probably, I think we crept a little bit above 30. Okay. I know that they didn't want it to get to 30, but it was to 30.
So you get through the shoot, and is the edit kind of going along swimmingly? Like, is it sort of smooth?
Yeah, the editor, Mark Helfrich, is very involved in the making of the movie anyway. Like he's the one who says, I don't understand what these characters are saying. And so either you're writing that into the movie where Chris would say, I don't know what you're saying, or you're going to have a problem. So he was very influential in changing some of the dialogue to make sure that that was a running gag between everybody. Mark cut the movie relatively quickly. There was one thing that Brett really wanted was to have Lalo Schifrin do the score to the movie. And Lalo Schifrin hadn't done a score in a long time. The composer, he composed the theme to Mission Impossible.
Cool.
And he had done Enter the Dragon, but he'd become out of favor. And Bob Shade really did not want him to do the score. And that was a huge battle.
Okay.
That ultimately we prevailed. Specifically Brett really pushed to prevail, which is great because the theme and the music of that movie, the second you start hearing the theme and that 70s retro, guitar, you're like, oh my God, this movie has a different energy than the typical movie that you're expecting to see.
Yeah.
But the movie was cutting really well. And, when you finish a movie, you generally give the movie to the marketing team before it's even done, even in its roughest form, so they can start cutting a trailer. And they cut a trailer before we had even finished the cut of the movie. That was great.
Okay.
Really great. I think it blew everybody's mind away to see it all working in context like that.
Yeah.
And I remember, because I'd made like 4 movies and like at that time, 2 of them had worked and like 2 of them really didn't work. And so I used to be in a panic that my trailers would play before I'd see a movie, like, oh my God, I can't hear the audience reaction to this. And I went to a movie with my wife in Century City, where there's this old theater complex in ABC, used to have theaters. And I walked out, and a friend of ours, Danny Waters, who's a great, he wrote Heathers and just a great filmmaker. Anyway, walked out of the movie, we started talking to him. He goes, God, we saw this movie, and there's this trailer for this movie, Rush Hour. And Christy looked at him like, don't say anything else. You're going to set Sean off into a nervous breakdown. But she didn't stop me. He goes, it looks amazing. And he had no idea that.
No way. I just got the chills. Amazing.
And that trailer had that type of effect. I mean, it was like, once people saw the trailer, they're like, what is this?
Yeah.
And then about 2 weeks later, after the trailer was released, we did a preview of the movie, a research screening of the movie, and we did it as a blind recruit. I don't know why we did it this way, but we didn't tell people what movie they were going to see.
Okay.
And so that means you say, hey, if you've seen 8 of the following 15 movies, you can go. And they were generally action or comedies or whatever. It was in Marina Del Rey, and they announced right before the movie that the movie they were going to see was Rush Hour, and the audience erupted.
They already knew.
Seen the trailer, or they somehow or another, this is before the internet.
Right.
So people like really, somehow or another that the word just got around quickly. But it was all based on that first piece of marketing materials. And so we screened the movie, and it was bananas in that theater. It was like somebody's birthday party.
Oh,
somebody's
my God.
first birthday party with a lot of people like partying their ass off.
And you were in the back, like observing the whole thing, like going crazy.
I've had one other preview on another movie when I was an executive that was that close, which was the preview for Creed 1. But besides that, I have never experienced that in my life. And so the audience went bonkers. You could tell even Bob Shea was happy, which was, quite the achievement. And the next morning, I remember we went out and we went to a bar that night and celebrated. And then we had a meeting with Bob at 8:00 in the morning. The next morning it was 7:30. Everybody was sort of walked in, and we went through the numbers. And usually, the way it works is you have a certain amount of excellent and then very good. And that's your top 2 boxes.
Yes.
And Bob said, we need to get those very goods up to the excellent. And there was a scene that we kind of felt like we needed a little bit more action from Jackie. And so there was a scene that was pitched to add something to the final set piece where he could do a traditional Jackie Chan style action scene that was more of a comedy, Buster Keaton type of scene. And Bob agreed to let us do it. So I went to Hong Kong. Jackie was already there because we had to shoot in Hong Kong. It was cheaper. And also Jackie was there with Brett and Rebecca and the head of physical production, Leon Dudevor. And we went to Hong Kong and recreated the set of the big Los Angeles Convention Center downtown in Golden Harvest Studios in Hong Kong, which was incredible.
God.
To shoot there. And we shot 2 or 3 days. And I remember the first day we shot, we got to set the next date, and Jackie, the film delivered to him, and he had edited on film. And at this point, film editing was sort of over. I mean, I came to LA right during the transformation to electronic, on a
digital.
On Avid.
Yeah.
But he was cutting on the film that had been processed with like splicers and like putting stuff up and cutting in front of us on a flatbed, cut the scene. And I remember
him with an editor, like he was directing an editor to do that.
No, he was doing the splicing himself.
No.
And so, and Brett and I, and it was good. It wasn't exactly the way we would have done it, maybe. And I think we're looking at each other. So it's okay. We'll figure this out when we're there. But so then we went, and the scene was Jackie, all these vases were in this final action scene with a lot of like explosions and whatever. And they were important historical artifacts. And Jackie wanted to save them. They were important to his culture. And so there was this scene where he was fighting with these bad guys, and they were knocking over the vases, knowing that Jackie would want to save the vases.
Oh, okay. Brilliant.
And that was the main reason we went to Hong Kong, was for this scene. And we wrote the scene, and at the end of the day, Jackie saves the last vase, and everybody's happy, and that's the end of the scene. So we had shot, I think, like 14 or 15 hours in like 100-degree heat and 180% humidity. It was awful. And around 3:00 in the morning, it felt like we had gotten most of the scene, and I was like on the verge of collapse. And our flight was going to leave like 5 hours later, and I left to go to the hotel to like sleep for an hour and then get in the car. And so did Leon, who worked at New Line. We both left right before the scene because we knew we'd seen it blocked out or whatever. And I went to sleep for about 45 minutes, and Brett knocked on the door, and he said Jackie took over the scene, and he shot up the last vase. The end of the gag, instead of him saving the last vase, was the vase being shot up by a bunch of bad guys. So he'd done all this work, and that was the final gag. I was like, and me and Leon were in a total state of panic. We'd flown out to Hong Kong to oversee the thing.
Oh my God.
And we ruined the scene. And I remember the flight back, we were like, okay, could we blow up the shot? I mean, people were shooting on film there. It wasn't as easy to blow up something.
Yeah.
So that didn't look like the thing had exploded, and like, oh, what are we going to do? And whose fault was it? And I'm sure in the back of his head, it's like, I'm going to blame Glickman. And I was like, I'm going to blame Leon, whatever it was. And then it got cut together, and we all saw it, and we didn't really mention it to anybody. And it was, of course, Jackie's a genius. It was the perfect payoff to that moment. And that's how that scene is.
Oh my God.
There's no other way for it to be, but that's how that.
He truly is a genius. I mean, I really didn't realize that he was really just cutting stuff himself. I mean, he was a masterful filmmaker. That's incredible.
Jackie Chan.
I can't hold it anymore! Just hang on, man. I'll be right back.
Chris Tucker.
FBI, take a picture. It's okay. Wait a minute.
Rush Hour.
So you nail the film. The edit is great. Then what? How does it start to roll out? Take me through some of those memories, if you can remember them.
The movie started getting a really good buzz because of the trailer. We were supposed to come out in August, and then the head of distribution at New Line moved us to this date in September, which felt like a weird date, but it ultimately was the exact right date. It was like the third week of September.
In 98, right? 1998.
Yeah, and these guys are geniuses. They kind of know like how many people are going to be available that day and compared to others. And I was in New York. It was my girlfriend's brother's wedding, a different brother. And I was in New York on the day it was released. And so was Chris doing publicity. And I went to see Chris, and we went to look at a theater at Times Square. And this was like, Times Square it wasn't the worst of Times Square. Like it wasn't Taxi Driver Times Square, but it certainly wasn't today's Times Square. And we went to a theater, and there was like 3 people in it at noon or whatever. And we were both so like, oh my God, it just tanks. Like,
God, oh my God, so stressful.
This happened.
Yeah.
And then I went to the rehearsal dinner, and by luck, the head of distribution, head of marketing of New Line were in New York, and the bar Elaine's, or the restaurant Elaine's on the Upper East Side.
Yeah.
And they had this machine back then, because there was no way to know how a movie did back in those days. What people would do is they would find out the next morning by calling box office hotlines, but you didn't get hourly reports, you didn't get any of that stuff, because it was all proprietary information you would get if you had the computer system that connected you to the theaters. But they had it set up at Elaine's.
Okay.
And so I went from the rehearsal. I mean, I was probably the worst boyfriend to go to a family event
Sure.
of all time because I'm so focused on this other thing.
Sure.
And I went to Elaine's. We were hoping the movie was going to open to 16. That's what we were projected at. And then it looked like, okay, we're going to hit 20. And then by the end, and then we were at Elaine's probably till about 1 in New York time. And it looked like we were going to possibly hit 30, but we had to see what was West Coast. And then when we woke up the next day, it made 33.
Oh my God. Oh my God. And so, God, was that just the greatest moment of your young career?
Definitely. I mean, I'm always get a little bit nervous about when things go well.
Yes.
I feel like
yes.
That's like I don't know if your audience would know what a kinahora is, but it's like a jinx of the evil eye.
Yeah.
So it was really fun. And then my wife has a saying, my girlfriend at the time, which I've never forgotten, which is, don't act surprised to be in the end zone. So I really had to like temper any sort of excitement. Anyway, certainly around her and her family.
Yes.
And it probably was a good thing that I had to spend the weekend at a wedding of, Callahan family so that I wasn't able to get my head large out of it. But here's what was great about it was not proving people wrong that they should have said yes, because certainly I've passed on things that I wish to God I hadn't.
Yeah.
Especially later as a studio executive. But I think that it was this underdog movie and that no stars were in this movie. So a movie like this, without a high concept, it wasn't like it was, based on a video game or, like a Mortal Kombat or whatever. It was just the chemistry of two people that 95% of the country didn't know who they were when we were making the movie. To have that kind of explosive opening was it just felt great. And it gave you a total discovery of actors on screen, which I think is so important. It's the saddest thing about, not to get on a soapbox, but about where the business is right now, is that there's so much pressure to have people that are well-known in the movies that you're seeing. It takes away the pleasure of discovering something and actually making the movie feel real because you don't know these actors that well, if at all. But it was a different time when at least one studio was willing to make that movie.
And as soon as it did that well, were you guys like, all right, let's do it again?
Yeah, except everybody got paid a lot more except for me and Roger. But I think that that's the sad thing about being a producer. But But we knew that we wanted to do another one, and it was pretty quick thereafter that we did another one.
Yeah.
And so at that point in time, I was very involved in the development of the second movie. And then Roger and I went and we started with Gary Barber, Spyglass Entertainment. And so I was actually an exclusive employee of Spyglass. So I couldn't do that much work on set. I mean, I went several times, but it wasn't the same experience.
Right.
What it was the first time. But the machine was kind of oiled at that point in time.
Sure.
So.
You had built the house. It was just
Yeah.
And Glickman, the whole premise of this podcast is what are the legacy films of Hollywood, and I try to choose films that I feel like have larger impact than just, it's a good movie, it did well. And Rush Hour to me is the franchise starter. It's putting these two people together that you wouldn't have thought would be so incredibly magical together. Does this feel like one of those films that is one of your legacy?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do. And I also feel like it's a strange place that Rush Hour has in people's hearts, and I can't explain it. And sometimes I try to distance myself from the movie as much as I possibly can, because I'm a huge fan of movies. So but we were in Morocco, and Christy and I, and there was a huge billboard that somebody had hand painted of Rush Hour. This is 10 years after the first movie had come out. And when you go to the AMC in Century City, there's a mural of all these Humphrey Bogart and crazy movie stars out there. And there's Chris Tucker and Jackie Chan. I'm like, does this really deserve to be on this?
Right.
But so I don't know. I think it is that underdog sensibility. And also I have to say, there had been movies that had not had white leads, action movies that had worked before this. But the notion of putting two multicultural leads in a movie that was a mainstream movie and marketed as a mainstream movie was real novelty at that time. And so I think that's part of the reason why it's lasted the test of time.
Right.
But certainly for that audience, it's also really funny. It still is really funny. I mean, I laugh at it whenever I see it on television. It's on TV a lot.
It is.
I mean, there was a moment about 4 months ago where Rush Hour 1, 2, and 3 were in the top 10 movies on Netflix for like 2 weeks. So, there's new audiences seeing it. And so I don't know that, it's a nice relationship story. And I think a great buddy movie, whether it's an action movie or whether it's a movie like The In-Laws or whatever type of movie, always connects if you can pull it off, because everybody's had that relationship with somebody that was sort of they sort of get to know them, right? And it's very aspirational that way.
No police work for 2 weeks? How long this flight?
15 hours.
15 hours? What we gonna do for 15 hours?
Whoa.
Oh, hell no.
Listen to me.
So Bex, that was such a fun episode. Jonathan Glickman is like a true Hollywood player. I mean, you can just tell he has like such energy. He's such a good storyteller. He produced his first film when he was like 24 years old. I mean, he's basically a wonderkind.
Weren't you like 26?
Okay, but he produced like proper hits. I was like in the indie market, like cleaning up the bathrooms in my first film.
You mean he produced a big commercial hit when he was 24? That is very rare. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, Rush Hour was probably his fourth film, but it was something that he had vision for. And he was a huge fan of Jackie Chan and was very determined to bring him into the American market in a big way. And I just think that that kind of thing is like what visionary producers do. They see potential. They see how an American market or any market could respond and introduce a new thing. It's always so fascinating to me when producers see something and they want to bring it to a larger audience. I think that's part of the magic of being a producer.
Yeah, well, the casting process of this was really interesting because Jon did have Jackie in mind. That is really rare unless it's a huge superstar, especially in the States. And so the fact that he saw that Jackie was going to have this crossover appeal, I think that is, like you said, it's a mark of a great producer. We say all the time when we're trying to cast a movie, we want to find the next this person or the next this person, because that's kind of what makes your movie stand out, is if you find a performer that people are surprised by. So I think good for him for seeing that so early on and for finding something that was going to work for him.
Yeah. And I think this was a great story of just gumption winning the day, right? This was a script that they optioned. It was a spec script that had the title Rush Hour, but according to Glickman, there was the final movie bore no relevance to the original script other than the title. They had to go through so many iterations and so many writers, and they were sort of trying to figure out a way to reinvent the sort of buddy genre that was popular with Lethal Weapon and some of these other franchises that had done so well. So he probably hired 4 or 5 writers. And I love that the final writer was someone who didn't have that much experience, that I think he maybe knew him through his sister or something like that, and he gave him a shot. And that was the writer who made the whole film work. I love the story of Jon saying the thing that this writer did was he made both Jackie and Chris underdogs. He made the character, Jackie Chan's character, someone who was sort of being excluded from the search party. And he made Chris Tucker this sort of lone wolf who was sort of the butt of the joke of the LAPD. And that was the thing that sort of made the whole film work. The idea of underdogs winning the day is a story that I think is tried and true, right?
It almost always works. But it is such a journey generally to get a script to its final place. And we've experienced that with so many of the projects that we've done, or so many of the projects that we have in development currently, where you have one vision for a script and then it doesn't quite work when you receive the script. And sometimes you have to go through 4, 5, 6 different writers on a project. And it takes that one writer who figures out one specific thing that changes the whole script. And then you finally land on something great. But it is such a process. And so to hear him talk about how the final version of the script that you see on screen is vastly different from the original spec that they optioned, that's very often the case. And it's very rare, I think, that a script is really close to the original version of it.
You know, the other thing, and this is just like the pearls of wisdom we take from all these brilliant producers that we're talking to. The thing I loved hearing from Jon is that the real magic from that script happened in the last few weeks when Jackie and Chris Tucker were in a room together. And that chemistry really was the thing to sort of heighten all those scenes, right? Like you just can't, a writer can't do that in a vacuum. He doesn't know what Jackie Chan does well or what Chris Tucker does well and how they're going to interact together. And so I loved the fact that Jon was willing to admit that really the magic came because those two had amazing chemistry. And they had both sort of generous hearts and both were so funny in their own ways. And that was the thing that made Rush Hour a success.
You know, one of the most famous and quoted lines from the franchise, the "Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?" might not have been in there unless when Jackie and Chris first met, they didn't have that moment and Jackie actually couldn't understand Chris.
That's exactly right, Bex. I love that, like, when Jackie and Chris met, Chris was like, I don't understand what Jackie's saying half the time. And that, like, that's the thing that prompted that whole dynamic, which is like so funny. It's so funny. Well, that was such a fun episode, and what a great storyteller he is. And we learned so much about building franchises and how these things work and taking shots on talent that maybe is, you know, not proven, but you have a gut about. All those things that we will take to heart. All right, guys. Well, we're going to be taking a small break over the next 2 weeks. We've loved doing this with you this year. We'll catch you back in January with brand new episodes.
If you are a new listener, then the holiday break would be a great time for you to go and catch up with all of our episodes because we've had some really great ones. So be sure to subscribe. Follow us on Instagram at Stay Gold Features. You can DM us with any comments or questions or any movies or producers you'd love us fit to interview. And in the meantime, happy holidays and stay gold.
Love you all. Stay gold.